Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt.
I'm Sam.
And you should know that by now, because you should have liked, subscribed, followed, commented, done all those things that people seem to want you to do all the time. So please do them. But today we are bringing you a breakdown of some of the sort of sword, I was going to say sword types, but that isn't really what the video is about, is it? It's more the sword materials
that are available to you for your training.
Absolutely. See, it's basically a professional.
Oh, yeah, I know. This is because of a comment that somebody left on one of our previous videos. So we're doing this in a bit of a response because we now have a range of materials that we're going to show you today.
Such a range.
Such range.
Such
yeah.
materials. So we're going to start with, effectively we've sort of done them in the order of the material that is a most realistic trainer to least realistic trainer, or rather we'll start with least realistic and move upwards. And that isn't to say that this is necessarily the order in which we recommend them. This is just the order we've chosen to present them. So we're going to start with one of our recent acquisitions, the foam Saber, or foam, I think they call this one actually the foam broadsword, don't
Yes,
they?
this is the foam broadsword because it has the straight blade.
Yeah, although they've given it a saber hilt, which is lovely.
Yes.
So, interesting side note, actually in French terminology this would be a saber because it has the saber style hilt. In English terminology this is a, well, it's not a saber, it could be a broadsword, could be a backsword, because it has a straight blade, and sabers are curved. So there you are, side note.
Yeah. So naturally, you might think foam is a bit of a jokey material. However,
and it is.
It is. Don't get me wrong. It is, and we will have a video of myself and Matt sparring with these at some point in the future, which because they're a jolly good bit of fun. But this is probably one of the cheapest options to get into HEMA, purely because
I think these were running about 30 quid.
Yes,
right?
yes, around about 30
and we
quid
got
for
these
the night
from.
shop. Yeah.
Night shop, or was it HEMA shop? Same thing, aren't
yeah, the night shop, the HEMA shop, that area.
Virtually interchangeable.
Yes, definitely. So, but yeah, so this is a really good bit of kit to get started with. I would say that it's good purely because you don't need a lot of protection whilst you're using this. Of course, it's up to each individual fencer for what they'd like to use, but
absolutely,
Matt and myself.
Yeah, I mean, I know at a lot of clubs this is used as a beginner weapon to get a beginner into sparring, and it's just used with a mask. Because Sam and I know each other, we fence a lot, we know each other's styles quite well, and we trust each other, we tend to use it without any protection, although I think Sam is wearing a cup today.
Yes.
He doesn't trust me quite that much.
Yeah, no, it's purely because one thing we would say about these is, even though, and I'm sure Matt won't mind, but the hit of these isn't actually that... Shush! Isn't that painful? But the thrusts from these, because there is literally no flex. I mean, it's probably hard to see against me, but there is no flex at all in this. I'm putting quite a lot of pressure.
Push against that. I can lean into it,
and there's no
right,
flex
my leg is off the ground right
at
now.
all. So yeah, so that's where you might want to be careful whilst using this. Think about removing thrust, and that's something that Matt and I have been thinking about during our sparring. Is that we use these purely as cutting simulators rather than
not that that's bad, but we'll do a separate complete review of this.
Yes.
of itself, because I think we've got a lot to say about this particular one. But we've got a few to get through. Oh, one. No, actually, we'll talk about that.
We'll talk about that in the review. So look, keep an eye out for the next video we'll be putting up online, which will be about.
So essentially, just to summarise, good points about the foam is it's cheap, it's easily accessible. You don't need much kit to do it. Bad points about the foam is, number one, it's foam.
Yeah.
So it's a bit near. Number two, the edges are incredibly thick. Not really.
I mean, you can't probably tell the difference. If I hold the guard out of shot, you probably can't really tell the difference between the side and.
It's enough to let you know that you've hit with the edge as opposed to the flat, but it's not. It's not.
Yeah, and it is worth us saying you can only use foam against foam.
That's true. So, so next one, very very briefly, is just your standard sports fencing saber. These are, depending on what you're actually doing in HEMA, these can be all right, particularly if you're doing some of the later Italian stuff where the practice sabers were not actually all that much heavier than these. Downsides, of course, are that you essentially need a puncture-proof jacket, you need essentially sports fencing equipment, but if you are just getting into HEMA, particularly if you're transitioning to HEMA from sports fencing, then this is perfectly adequate for doing solo drill. You just have to have a bit of control because you can whip this round much faster than you could, say, a military saber or a backsword or something like that. But certainly they have their place, and if you've already got them, don't chuck them. It
is also something you have to maintain as well, so keeping an eye on the condition of the blade and that sort of thing, which comes when you work with steel more so than the other materials we've got here.
Absolutely. Do you want to We're in a lockdown. We're not in a lockdown at the moment, thank goodness.
No.
We're in a, but we are still in pandemic country, so we're only touching our own.
Which is why we're outside at the moment, and we're trying to keep our distance and only holding our own equipment with that one. So this is the Rawlings options that you can have. So this is the synthetic, and we've named this the light synthetic option.
Yeah.
With this one, this particular model is the cutlass configuration you can have. So the basket hilt and the messer blade, which kind of then forms together to make this nice cutlass.
And we already have a full video on the Rawlings range. So if you're curious about the range itself, then
exactly.
Go
And it's worthwhile saying that this is a good cheap option to get into, but we do recommend protection whilst using these, because these are not as forgiving as the foam. I'm not going to demonstrate by hitting Matt.
No, although if you give a thrust in,
there's a nice bit of
see
flex.
It does flex enough.
Yeah.
That you can do it. You wouldn't want to do it without anything.
No, you'd want some form of padding, so some form of chest protector, especially at a gorget. But there's another video on we've put about the equipment we would recommend for light sparring, and that's what we consider these to be with light sparring.
You could certainly, depending on your opponent and how much you trust them, your partner and how much you trust them, you could certainly go with less protective equipment. Obviously, you're always going to need a mask. We'd recommend a gorget, and depending on the Rawlings itself, you may need gloves or not. But yeah, we rank these in the light category. Yeah. And they're a good intermediate. And what are these, about 45?
Yeah, 45. And a lot of clubs. Yes, a lot of clubs out there also have deals with the night shop, so there are club discounts that you might want to inquire if you are in a different group. It's worthwhile saying as well that these are, because this isn't foam, you've got the edge is much thinner, which then means that these are really good for drill as well. So they're a good step into drill, because you won't need protection for that, providing you're on your own or depending on what you're doing. But yeah, these are really good for drill because the weight is quite nice, the balance is quite nice, and yeah, they work really well with all the protected gear as well, because that's what they're designed to go with.
Absolutely. So I think essentially, if you are joining a club that uses these, this is what you want. You can probably skip the foam entirely. As I said, we have it because we have a lot of things anyway.
It's recently been Matt's birthday.
Yes, thank you very much. But also, it's as a club, we like to have things that we can give to beginners and have a range. We also use them, and they are beneficial because, as I said, if you trust the partner you're with, you can go without protection, which is a valuable thing. But yeah, if you're just starting out and you're in a club particularly that uses these, this is what we recommend.
Yeah, definitely.
Brings us on to option number 4.
So this is the Black Fencer, specifically the Black Fencer 3 bar. Now this isn't necessarily representing just Black Fencer here. This is all sorts of heavier grade synthetics. So Black Fencer, Purple Armory, those sorts of things. I think Spurs do some heavy synthetics actually. But this is essentially, Black Fencer particularly describe their heavy synthetics, they don't call them heavy synthetics. We're differentiating between this and the Rawlings, so light synthetic, heavy synthetic. They describe these as like steel, and that is one of the major advantages and one of the major disadvantages in them, in that you have to use full protective equipment when you're sparring with one of these.
But the positive being they are a lot cheaper.
They're a lot cheaper. You could get two or three Black Fencers for the price of one steel. So if you're in a club that does multiple weapons from different time periods, say you need a longsword, you need a rapier, you need a saber, then you could get all three for the price of one steel, which is certainly beneficial.
And it is worthwhile saying that if you're in a club that has Rawlings and Black Fencers, you'll find that the Rawlings do actually take the brunt of the Black Fencers. Of course, yes, they do come out a bit bruised, but in the same way that the Black Fencers will as well. It happens with synthetic, with the plastic material. Is going to get bruised. But this particular model has gone up against this particular sword many times, and is still fighting strong and going very well. So just pointing out.
Absolutely. So yeah, the things you get a more realistic sword. This moves at the pace that you would expect a actual steel to move. And in some cases actually slightly heavier, but that's the major advantage in this, as opposed to something like the Rawlings, which you have to have some discipline in using, because you can whip them round in a manner that is unrealistic for a sword that it's trying to replicate. So we love all the types of ranges that we have on offer here. These, as I say, if you've got the protection to use these, fantastic. And if you're in a club that needs multi-weapons, then this is a great option. If you're in a club that only does one weapon, quite honestly, you're probably better off skipping the heavy synthetic altogether and moving on to steel straight away, if there is an affordable steel option, which I do appreciate for some weapons there isn't at the moment. Although we are in a kind of golden age where there's a lot of things coming up.
Yes, yeah, lots of things coming about, which is what's great to see. This video may be outdated within a couple of weeks.
We love to be outdated.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I mean, if you're doing HEMA, you love,
Yeah,
you love old things.
We live in the past.
So that brings us on to our last option, of course, which is steel, which is essentially everyone's favourite, because if you're into swords, you want something that's as close to a sword as possible. And the only real disadvantage in steel, well, the only two real disadvantages in steel are the price. It can be it's prohibitively expensive to get involved. Number one, because of the price of the actual sword itself, but number two, because you need full kit to do it, and that is also expensive. I mean, is at least as expensive as the sword itself.
Yeah.
Probably more so.
Yeah.
You know, I think a decent saber these days will run you about $250, give or take.
Yeah. And that's kind of like that's the cheapest of the options available usually, with the ones that you can trust and reliable. It is worthwhile saying that kind of like there are kind of like second-hand kind of HEMA markets out there. I know that Matt got this particular model second-hand from a trusted source, and that's one thing we would stress, that whenever you're buying any form of equipment,
know who you're buying it from.
Know who you're buying from, because when it comes to steel, there are more risks, of course, but if you find a bargain, then definitely go for it, because I'm sure, I can't remember what you paid for yours, Matt. 80, which of course is a lot cheaper than 250, and it's still in very good condition.
Absolutely. And you do find the edges, of course, you've got to take more care of them because they will burr up. It's not difficult to do. You just got to, if you've only ever used synthetics before, that's something you're not going to be that conscious of. So you're going to have to be careful when you use these that they're not too burred up, because they will start cutting jackets and things. You also want to make sure that you've got a decent tip on the end. I know a lot of places have moved away from just having flat tips, and they now require rolled or spatula tips. So do be careful of that, especially if you're planning on entering any competitions, because they will have their own regulations. But also steels, they generally are very flexible, sometimes in fact more flexible than some of the other trainers. So they can be safer in some regards, but you need the equipment for these. So that's our range, really.
Yeah, and I think what we've brought up with each particular material that we've covered today is the fact that it's all down to you. If you're an individual,
well,
who's
they
training,
are individuals.
yes, you are individuals. You're not a collective. But if you're training individually, then of course any of these would be fine for you to start off with. If you're in a club or you're about to make membership, I would reach out to your instructor and ask them.
Always ask first.
Ask the members, talk to them, learn from their experience. Both Matt and I will hold our hands up and say that we have done HEMA the expensive way round. We started when there was very little in the way of trainers available, and I think we can both agree wasted a little bit of money in our experimentation.
Unnecessary things, but then that's how you learn.
Yes.
And the other thing is, don't rush into buying anything.
No.
Almost, you can do anything in HEMA, any solo drill with a stick. And that's what was used historically. You do not need any of this to be able to do HEMA. So find a club. If you're going to train in a club, find that club. Reach out to the instructor, as Sam says. Find out what they use. They might have second-hand kit that they're prepared to sell you. They will almost certainly have kit that they'll be able to lend you to begin with, and you can go from there.
Yeah, make sure you like HEMA before you would fully invest.
Yeah, absolutely, but also HEMA is such a broad church.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
That you might initially, as we did, start with one weapon that you really like and put a lot of money into that, only to realise that actually you like something else. So,
and there's also non-weapon options as well,
absolutely,
of course, as unarmed stuff.
A cheap way is getting into wrestling or dagger or something like that, and more people need to do that. Or pugilism.
Yes, definitely.
Which we hopefully are going to have some videos of.
Yes, soon, at some point. Yeah.
But anyway, I think we've rambled on enough.
Yes, we hope this answers the question kind of from the person who left the comment. So
absolutely.
Thank you very much. And if you have any videos you'd like us to make, or any advice you'd like us to give, then please let us know, and we'll try and help where we can.
Yeah, send the check-in and we'll do the video.
Right, take care, everyone.
Sayonara.